fully hash out Nepal as an issue. We argued it plenty for several hours here before. But I would say that if the paper, the document that State Department literally puts forward on this grant for Nepal says expanding atheism, I would say expanding is promoting. And I would further make the point that the folks on the ground said that atheism was not one of the marginalized groups. Atheists were not one of the marginalized groups in Nepal. This was absolutely an instance, Mr. Malinowski, I think you used an appropriate word, experimentation. I don't think the American people want their dollars used for experimenting on whether atheism should be expanded in some country abroad. And I appreciate the comments on it. I appreciate the thought on it, but I entirely disagree, regardless of where the policy came from. I believe it is now back to Mr. Mills for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Look, I want to talk about this whole grant and localization thing, but I also want to talk about how these grants has not seen any national security strategic success and goals. Let's go back to Afghanistan and Iraq. I spent 7 years in Iraq, almost 3 years in Afghanistan. I've worked with the State Department, I've worked with the government, I've worked with the agencies, I've worked in uniform, and I've watched the gross abuse of programs like Black and Veatch's Kandahar-Helmand Power Project, the idea of being able to spend billions and billions of dollars that we're going to do hydro turbine electricity into Kandahar-Helmand, and that's somehow going to work. Are you aware with what happened with that project, Mr. Malinowski?
No, and again, what we've been focused on here is we do need to distinguish between big economic development projects.
But this didn't start out as a big economic development program. Originally, they were saying that we're going to give small grants to the people that are there to do construction areas just to try and refurbish what was existing. Then that failed. Then it was, okay, now we need to grow this a little bit bigger. Okay, now that failed. Now we need to go ahead and bring in all new equipment. Now that failed. And then it starts to get to the tunes of billions and billions of dollars. And you said something that USA doesn't do small grants. Well, I know for a fact that in Libya, you had organizations like DAI and also Creative Associates and also Chemonics who's given $1,000 to $5,000 grants. They were giving grants. Do you want to know what one of those was for? It was to buy speaker equipment for a local rapper, because they thought that if he made music about governance, that was going to stabilize the nation. Does that seem like that's what American taxpayers want to see? Is there money being spent to buy rap equipment for people in a nation which has nothing to do with stabilization, never had any actual impact whatsoever? These are the things that, my point in bringing up these failed programs is that we've tried the monitoring evaluation. We contract one company, we then contract a company like Management Systems International, MSI, who's supposed to be the M&E gurus and experts, who then spend even more money, and then they can't even track the money that they're spending for M&E while trying to also track the money that's being done to the implementing partner. And then we talk about this grand scheme of we're going to do localization. Let's talk about localization. The only difference is instead of the Thursday night debauchery that goes on by most of the expats that are over there celebrating drinking on a Thursday night like they did in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all the rest, you then just have them refilling boots and positions here in D.C. and calling themselves deputy chiefs of party, you know, program assembly manager, all this. You're not saving any money by trying to do this localization route. And in fact, I would argue that we saw actually a lot more corruption in Iraq as a result of that whenever we were building bridges that were $750 million. And then all of a sudden come to find out half the bridges when we investigated hadn't even been built. My issue is that I don't see where cash diplomacy has been successful. I don't see where that's stabilized nations. Where's Iraq right now? Where's Afghanistan right now? Where's Libya right now? We spent trillions of dollars in these nations, and then we throw it out when we do things like the 2005 Iraq Constitution under Article 76 that establishes sectarianism, which hasn't existed since pre-apartheid eras in North Ireland. My point is that we can talk about M&E and all this. I disagree with your assertion that, you know, the UN enforces all these grand sanctions. What about the sanctions on Iran right now? How's that working in regards to ensuring that they don't export more oil than they've ever done in their history under this administration? Do you think they're imposing sanctions? Do you think they're actually upholding things? No. General Gutierrez and Ban Ki-moon under Resolution 2231 knew there was mid-range ballistic missile, violations, and yet they did nothing to actually prevent it. So tell me again how cash diplomacy makes national security a priority.
Well, we heard about Iran sanctions, people getting drunk, and projects in Afghanistan. There's a lot to respond to.
Do you dispute any of those, though?
I mean,
I've seen it for
I
myself
don't even
firsthand.
know how to make sense of what you just said, but you asked me. Let me take.
Making sense of it is simply this: that the cash diplomacy doesn't work, Malinowski. That's what I'm saying.
You asked about how does helping a rapper who might be spreading a message about democracy help us? Well, I recall that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we helped defeat the Soviet Union in part by supporting artists and writers and cultural people and radio programmers and musicians and people who were spreading the culture of democracy through art in Europe. You talk to any dissident in Eastern Europe who went through that, and they would say that's one of the most effective things that we did.
Where's Libya now? Are they a failed state?
What's that?
Would you consider Libya a failed state?
I'm talking about Eastern Europe.
But I didn't mention Eastern Europe. I mentioned that specific program just to show that this is not being effective. And I asked how national security is improved.
Much of the things we try to do are not going to be successful. When I was at DRL, I used to make an analogy, a baseball analogy, to my team. I said that if you're batting 300 in a world where you're going up against dictators, sociopaths, mass murderers.
Well, at $35.6 trillion in debt, I don't think that we can be batting a 300 for the American people.
Well, it's better than batting zero.
Well, I can tell you right now, we are batting zero.
You know who's going to cheer it? It's going to be the Russian government. The Chinese Communist Party would love us to stop doing this. Why? If you think it's unsuccessful,
but they're already expanding, sir. You're seeing the Russia, China, Iran, North Korea geopolitical alignment already expanding.
All of our enemies
You've watched
passing
Belt and Road
laws.
Initiative expand. You've watched China continuing to go into developing nations and all across Africa and being very successful in this. You're watching Wagner Group down in Chad and CAR, who's continued to expand, and now they're in our own Western Hemisphere with economic coercion of Honduras and Panama taking over the canals for treaties, going into Cuba, and actually helping with the fentanyl pill presses of Darien Gap. So we're not winning the war against China, Russia, by going out and doing what you're saying, which is these small funding grants.
So why are they passing laws and all of their allies to try to forbid us from doing these grants?
Why are we continuing to go ahead and give money but not account for where it's going?
It's your
Why
job
are we
to
still
account for
giving money into the Taliban by paying certain electric bills and housing rental bills that we know falls into the hands of those very people we fought for 20 plus years? I mean, my point is that I don't believe and what you're doing is successful. I don't believe in the USAID cash diplomacy model, and I've seen it fail time and time again firsthand as I sat on these things like Ramp Up North. And you can continue to do your little eyebrow roll or whatever you'd like to do right now, but you know for a fact that if we go and look at the monitoring evaluation books, we look at cigar reports, we look at OIG off of John Sopko, that you can't dispute the fact that a lot of money was waste, fraud, and abuse at the taxpayers' expenses.
Well, maybe I'll put you